afternoon, and welcome to our afternoon session of the C3 Career Awareness Day. We're super excited to continue to host the Next Shift Better Build a Better Houston series. I'm excited to introduce you to our next keynote speaker. Just a couple of quick housekeeping details again. After this session, you will be able to join into any of our afternoon tracks. We will be doing a technical track as well as a workforce track, and those are in your agenda. But thank you so much for joining us today. So Moody Hurd is going to be speaking to us today about hot jobs in Houston, and you might wonder why he is qualified to do that, because he looks awfully young and you wouldn't think he's an expert, but he is in fact just that. A graduate from Washington and Lee College in Virginia, Moody is an entrepreneurial spirit completely through and through. He is also currently the CEO and founder of BuildForce, which he's going to tell you a little bit about, but which is a program that is all about connecting craft workers to construction jobs, helping them progress their careers. So Moody, without further ado, we'll let you talk about the hot jobs in Houston.
Awesome. Angela, thanks so much. And just shout out to Angela. She's been a very special and helpful person to me as we've gotten this business started. So thanks a lot, Angela. And hey, quick question, guys. There we go. That's perfect. So everyone, thanks for joining. I'm super excited to be able to chat with you all. Like Angela mentioned, I'm a couple years, well, more than a couple years now. I'm about 7 years out of high school at this point. And so I'm super excited to get to chat with you all. It doesn't feel like it was that long ago that I was in high school. But I do have a little bit of the real world under my belt. And so I'm super excited to get to share with you all a little bit about what I've learned since I graduated school. So I actually want to go back all the way to before I was y'all's age, when I was in middle school. So I had two favorite TV shows growing up. One was Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, and the host Mike Rowe basically go around and spend time with people who didn't just use their mind to run a business, but they used their body. They're out in the field. They would get dirt under their fingernails, and they ran construction businesses and businesses where you had to, maybe put on a hard hat and use your muscles. And I absolutely love that show. I think I saw every single episode they ever aired. And I also love this TV show called Mythbusters, where the hosts would basically use science and technology to see if they could solve problems or myths. Like I remember one was, can we launch an entire car across a football field? And they actually built a catapult to do just that. And so I think I saw every single episode of that TV show as well. And so that was like a very formative experience for me. So growing up, Nick, you can do the next slide. Thanks so much. When I was in high school and then in college, most of my summer jobs, until I started getting into the technology side of things, which I'll talk about in a second, actually involved working outside with my hands, and I really love that. This picture on the left is me and my best friend. We went down for a summer and worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week on an oil rig out in the Gulf of Mexico. Super dirty job. Favorite job I ever had until the job that I have today, and absolutely loved it. And then I also spent time working on ranches growing up. And so working outside was something that was really important to me, and a big part of like my experience growing up, which also dovetailed with the next slide, which was as I got a little bit older and I was approaching the latter end of my college career, I started getting really interested in technology and innovation. And what I mean by that specifically is I became really interested in the way that people could use software to make their lives better. And so I started trying to figure out, in studying business models, how do people use technology and software to improve their lives. And so those are two like really important from a professional perspective, two things that are really important to who I am and kind of how I got here. Next slide, Nick. So I started wondering a few years ago, what would happen if you mixed these real world jobs where people go out into the field and build things with their hands and technology. And I became super preoccupied with that question. I got a team of friends together and we started doing a lot of research, and we asked the question, how could you, what would that look like? What would we build? What does an app look like that actually helps people who are involved in construction or involved, who run businesses where they use their hands to build things. And so going on to the next slide, we ultimately landed on a concept for a company that we started earlier this year called BuildForce. And all we do is you could actually go into the App Store right now and download our app. We get folks who work in the construction industry to create kind of a profile. They share with us what they're good at, what their work history is. If they have some sort of certification or license, they share that with us. They can share information on people they worked with previously, so we can call and see what they're like to work with. And we help connect them with jobs. So at the end of the day, we just connect people who are in construction with firms that are trying to hire construction professionals. And if you hit the next slide for me, Nick. So just fast forwarding today, over the past few months, we have already got over 1,000 construction workers that we're working with, trying to help place them in jobs. These are actual people who have downloaded our app and signed up, just a small handful of them. And a lot of these folks we've gotten to know personally and have really, really enjoyed it. And another piece of the app, if you hit the next slide for me, Nick, we've also built an application for construction firms. So these could be, VPs of operation, general superintendents, even foremen out in the field who are in charge of manpower, for them to find exactly the person that they need or the people that they need for a particular task that needs to be done. So I'll give you guys a good example of how this works. If you hit the next slide for me, Nick. So one of the first folks that we ever worked with was a guy named Scott. So Scott is a great lead carpenter and framer. He basically does all of the kind of like structural carpentry work on residential projects. There's a remodeling company that was there's a house down in kind of the south part of Houston that had been completely flooded by a hurricane that had swept through, and they were just completely gutting and remodeling the house. We helped Scott get that job. He did an absolutely fantastic job. I got to go spend time with him down on the job site. It was a ton of fun. I've never seen someone who takes more pride in their work. He really, really enjoyed it. Did such a good job. And was one of those people who really enjoys working with his hands. He's built an entire career out of it. And so, the next time when Scott wraps up his current project and is looking for a new one, our job is to just make sure, using technology as well as actually knowing him in person, to make sure that he has another job lined up. So that this is just a real world example of kind of how we work. So, and thanks, Nick. You can go ahead and hit the next slide. So zooming out a little bit. So that's what I do. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a perspective on why Angela asked me to come and chat with you guys today. But really the topic of the discussion today is what's going on in Houston and the job market. And I think that, it kind of helps to actually tell when we were starting this business, when we started BuildForce, a lot of it came from one-on-one conversations with people in the industry, with tradesmen and tradeswomen who actually work out in the field, as well as with business owners who help employ and hire those people. And we also just did a lot of research though. So we were on the internet, actually looking at the data to see if this was a big enough opportunity. And what we found was that it was a huge opportunity. So I'll reference this study that actually you can see a link down at the bottom for this. This was back in 2018. A pretty robust study found that Houston has over 7 million people in the greater Houston area. 240,000 of those are involved in the construction industry. That's a lot. So let's say a public school has 2,400 students, your average kind of public school in the Houston area. So you would need 100 of those. If all the students got together and said, hey, we'll all decide to work in construction, that's how many folks are in the construction industry today. It's really, really large. And not only is it large, but it's growing. It's growing by about 10% or 25,000 a year. That's a really fast growth rate. Now, 2018 was a year after a hurricane, so the growth rate was a little faster. We needed a lot of people to help the city recover. But nonetheless, the construction market in Houston has been growing. COVID is slowing it down a little bit, but the point here is that there are just more jobs basically that are coming. And the final piece is, and this is the really interesting piece. So it's really big, it's getting bigger. And this last piece says that it's still not big enough. So the labor market is still not big enough. That means 80% of companies cannot find enough people who are good at their job, willing to show up on time, willing to put in the 40 hours a week plus that it takes to get the job done. 80% of construction firms are saying we can't find enough of those people. And so if I'm kind of an economics nerd, so if you're not interested or don't care, just zone this next 30 seconds out. But basically what's happening is if you've taken an economics class in high school, or you probably will at some point encounter this concept, it's supply and demand. When there's not a lot of something, but a lot of people need that thing, it becomes more expensive. So that's what's happening in the construction labor market is there aren't enough people to do the work, but there still are a ton of people who are like, I need to find somebody who can do carpentry work for me, who can do the electrical wiring, who can do all the plumbing work on this commercial project that we have going up. And so because of that, segue into the next slide for me, Nick. So because of that, you can actually earn a really, really great living in the construction space. And so if you've been tuned in today, especially to some of the trade specific panels that have been going on today, which have all been fantastic. I won't go into all the specifics of each trade, but the thing that I would want to share with you that I think is really interesting. So if you did listen to those panels, you would have learned some of the skills that go into being an electrician or being a sheet metal mechanic or a carpenter. And each of those attracts a different kind of person, but typically they're folks who like to work with their hands. They kind of think about things analytically, and in some cases have a little bit of an inclination towards, geometry and mathematics, and people who have a strong work ethic and like camaraderie and teamwork. So those are all fantastic things. And I won't go too much into depth on those. The thing that I want to highlight that I think is really interesting is, and so this is kind of I think there's a misconception around like construction and construction workers as, for instance, like digging ditches. Well, that is a big part of the job and that happens. But it's not quite as simple as that. Actually, there are a lot of skills that go into it and a lot of training. And if you're someone who's dedicated to acquiring those skills over through an apprenticeship, or even through some sort of training, through a trade school potentially, or even just kind of like on the job training, you can in pretty short time work your way up to an income that is well above what's considered a living wage. And so that term is a really interesting term. And I think it's a really interesting, so a living wage, I'm not talking about a minimum wage. That's a minimum wage is one thing. A living wage is basically enough, like above that threshold, your life's not going to get any happier because of money. So in the city of Houston, let's just say you're in high school now, you fast forward 10 years, all of a sudden you're my age, you're starting to put on weight where you don't want to because you don't have time to exercise. And I'm just kidding. But you all of a sudden you're in your late 20s and maybe you have a family at this point. Well, that, according to MIT, okay, which is a great college that does a lot of great research up in the Northeast, living specifically in Houston with a family, if you just kind of like $54,000 is the number that according to that research, above that, it's great, but your life's not going to be like, you're not going to be happier because you have more money at that point. And so that's like, you've heard people say money doesn't buy you happiness. There's a level below which you can struggle to meet basic financial needs, above which you meet your financial needs, and you don't necessarily need more money to be happy. And so that number happens to be $54,000 in Houston. The average electrician, just picking a trade, one of the ones that was discussed today, the average electrician in the city in Texas, earns $61,000 a year. It's a journeyman electrician who has several years of experience, has worked their way through an apprenticeship, and is basically someone that's dependable, reliable, a team player. And here's the thing that's really interesting about this, and actually we can go to the next slide from here, Nick. So one thing that I think is especially interesting about construction is you don't have to go get a college degree. It's really easy to get started. So I've got a few bullet points here, and I want to talk about some other, because there are so many like exciting, interesting opportunities that I've gotten to encounter just in my personal life and have done some research on. But one thing that's really cool about construction is you don't necessarily have to take out college debt. So the average, and I'll just use some numbers here, but the average 30-year-old with a college degree is earning about $50,000 a year. That's $10,000 less than the experienced journeyman electrician that we were talking about earlier is earning $61,000 a year. But the real key difference is that individual, if you didn't have the means to pay for your college out of pocket, it's probably taking out college debt that can last decades. You pay that off every decade. That comes directly out of that $50,000 a year average that the college grad is earning. And so I think it's one thing to consider, which is that, one thing that I hope that your career counselors are doing with you, and I'm sure that, your parents or guardians are doing with you, is, hey, let's talk about what really gets you excited in life. And we'll talk about following your passions in a second, because I think that's a really important catch-all for kind of career considerations. But if you are there, it's a very like multivariate. There are lots of variables that might go into deciding what you want to do. One that I think is really interesting is, and you can actually apply this to things like art or music as well, is if you're not sure exactly what you want to do, it's worth considering the fact that it's actually, you can get started in the construction space pretty quickly, figure out if you really enjoy camaraderie, working, using your mind as well as your body to do your work, and committing to learning a trade. You can figure that out. And if you don't like it, you can always decide to go back to college, and that increases, there are more options coming out of college, and you get to learn potentially what you want to do. So I think this concept of an apprenticeship, which is I'm going to go learn under somebody who's really good at something that I think that I'm interested in, is really cool. And the other thing that I've seen in the construction space is that with some experience, if you're also entrepreneurial like I am, you can actually go start your own business and have a huge leg up if you're someone who has genuine curiosity and willingness to learn things outside of your trade. So you can actually go start your own electrical contracting business, or your own flooring business, your own mechanical business, and start bidding on projects yourself. And I think that's that really increases the upside if you are somebody who says, hey, I like all the things that come with being a tradesperson, but I want to flex my muscles a little bit more on some other things outside of just performing the trade. It's a really interesting place to start a business. And if you think like a business person, you can learn those skills online and do something and actually start to hire people and build your own team, which I think is super exciting. So that's sort of what I've learned in the construction space. And just on that note, I will Angela is more than welcome to send my contact information out to people to get in touch with. I'll touch really quickly on just a couple of other, in case you guys wanted to chat with me a little bit more. I'm happy to talk with anyone. a couple of things that I would highlight. One is we work with a lot of folks in construction, of course, because that's our service, is trying to help make sure that they have work. The team that we have internally that's building our apps, they're all software developers. That's another job that Houston, if you are somebody who learning software development is kind of like learning a new language. So if you enjoy learning new languages and you kind of enjoy puzzles, software development is really, really interesting and exciting. And increasingly, you don't actually have to have a college degree. So like Google, which is the most prestigious, place to work in software, it's actually hiring people who don't have college degrees. You can, if you're a self-starter, you can teach yourself a lot there. Houston's healthcare economy is really large. And so there's more people working in healthcare in Houston than any city in the country. And the final thing I'd say, that you probably hear this a lot, but it's really true. If you're passionate about something, I remember thinking when I was in high school, well, I'm just a high schooler. I don't know enough yet to decide what I really want to do with my life, even though I had genuine passion. And fortunately, I've been able to follow those like a little bit down the road. It's never too early to say, hey, I'm really obsessed with this one thing. I'm really crazy about it. I really want to pursue it, get smart on it. You would be really shocked and surprised by the number of people who are willing to help younger individuals, someone just graduating high school, who just walks up to him and says, I really want to learn more about what you do, and I'm really interested in it because of XYZ reason. And that reason could be as simple as, I really loved watching this TV show when I was younger, and I want to learn more about how that thing works. I think I would really love to see more people who are deciding that they really want to dig into something that they just became interested in for no particular reason. I think the world needs more of those people. And so that could be in construction. It could be doing something technical like software engineering. It could be as an artist or a musician. And the world needs those too. So never discount your passion. The one thing that I'll say is, if, for instance, you want to invent something new and start a new business, that can be very difficult. And there's, the statistics just say 95% of people who start new businesses tend to fail. And I've seen that in the real world. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try it, because you learn so much and your likelihood is higher the next time. So that's your encouragement, that I think that as much as taking the safe path or taking the path your parents want you to take, whatever that may be, there are so many like really cool, exciting options out there that are not exactly what you're told you should be doing. And I think construction is super interesting. I think that people who are interested in software that's also a really interesting way to go. Lots of jobs out there. And with that, I'll end it on that. Anyone's welcome to get in touch with me, and Angela is more than welcome to share my contact information, because I'd love to talk to anybody who's trying to figure out what they want to do after they graduate high school.
Thanks, Moody. I just have a couple questions for you. I'm just going to follow up with a couple of things. So we talked this morning, and if you were in the morning keynote session, Angela Cody talks a lot about how her passion was art, and she talked a little bit about how she loved to watch Saturday Night Live, and she wanted to be an entertainer. So I think it's interesting that you both capitalized on capturing your passion, right? Yours was, you loved being outside. You loved these two different shows. She loved Saturday Night Live. What kind of, what do you think it is that helped you have the courage to do something that maybe wasn't what your parents thought you were going to do, and try something new based on your passion?
Well, the honest question to that is I was never very good at listening to what my parents wanted me to do. So that was already
Don't be a rebel, kids. That's not what he's saying.
Yeah, don't be a rebel. I'm not saying that. But what I will say actually on that point is, there's so one thing that I was born with is a lot of curiosity. I was like a hyper curious child. And that is, rebels have that too. And I think that there are rebels who are disruptive and disrespectful, and you definitely do not want to be that person. There's also the kind of rebel who asks questions that other people don't ask. and who is hyper curious. And I think that that leads you in a lot of interesting directions. And so I think one of the most underrated after teamwork, after being a hard worker and having discipline, one of the most underrated character traits in my opinion is curiosity and kind of like in some ways being a contrarian. And so to the point earlier, like not a lot of people who are interested in software are also interested in the construction world. So my first thought was sounds like a really interesting place to go do some digging, no pun intended, and go try to see if there's opportunity there. So it's curiosity I think is the thing that gave me courage. Is I was more curious and like interested in doing something new than I was afraid of anything not working out.
So when you think about software and construction, or technology and construction, can you talk about any trends that you think you're seeing with the folks that you're helping find jobs? Do they need to be technologically savvy?
Well, so what we're learning is that, let's talk for just a second about the tradespeople that we're placing. There was a belief a few years ago that there's a certain type of person that has a smartphone. There's a certain type of person that doesn't have a smartphone. That doesn't exist anymore. Essentially, everyone has a smartphone, especially below a certain age group. But even like all of our grandparents have smartphones at this point, or a lot of them do. I can't speak for everybody. And that kind of user behavior of like, how do I call an Uber? How do I order a Domino's pizza on my phone? How do I press the like button on something or enter information? It's kind of become ingrained in human behavior at this point. And so we have actually seen really widespread adoption and willingness of people to say, this is an interesting way to find work and actually try to make more money in the construction space. And so we've had huge uptake. We've had a very small, I'd say like maybe 1% to 2% of people who say, I don't want to use an app to basically find work. So we've seen like really widespread adoption. And on the business owner side, people who are running construction businesses, I would say on that side, people who have been doing things the same way for a long time are a little more hesitant to change the way. Like typically they would pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, Moody, I need 5 electricians. To get them now to use technology, there's some people who are more willing to do it and some people who are less, but we see the same trend happening where you have people who are starting to say, oh wow, this actually could make my life easier. I can save a little bit of capital to use in another place if I'm just using a more efficient process. And so that's the broad trend, is that we're seeing like really widespread adoption, and the money is following that. There's a lot of investors who it's grown, I think 4x in the past couple of years. Investors who are saying, I want to invest specifically in construction technology because they are doing the research and they see the trends heading that direction as well.
That's a great segue, right? So there is a lot of an investment in construction technology, not just around hiring, but around all kinds of things. We're seeing things like robotic rebar tires, so people don't have to be knelt down tying rebar in the concrete. So it's a very up and coming space. So someone who has, like you said, a passion for both, like you did, this is the place to be. Technology and construction are merging in one right now. I would like to kind of maybe close out with, I don't know, Nick, if we have any questions from the audience in the app or not, but I'd like to close out with, what do you think is the best piece of advice, any mentor or guide that you had at getting you to where you are right now? What was the best piece of advice you were given about seeking out a good job, a career that would allow you to have a happy life?
Man, what a great question. I think I have to give the obligatory answer. My dad coached me in football growing up. I played football all 4 years in college. I remember when I was in when I was in second grade, he was coaching our little league football team, and he basically gave this analogy where it was like, this is when everyone knew Mike Tyson, and Mike Tyson was a big time boxer. And he said, if I went in the ring and fought Mike Tyson and I trained for 5 years to fight him and I lost, does that make me a loser? I was like, no. And he says, well, does it necessarily make Mike Tyson a winner even if he didn't train at all? My dad, and we all said no. Anyway, what my dad taught me was that you don't need to be afraid of failure. And so that's allowed me to do something that's a little bit riskier, where a lot of people do fail. And so generally speaking, I try to approach my professional life without a lot of fear of failure, and that's helped. And it's been really fulfilling too, because it makes it more fun.
Awesome. I'm going to open it up to our attendees. Is there anybody who would have a question around what are the hot jobs again in Houston for either myself or for Moody? And then any other questions you might have about seeking out a positive experience for your career. And we'll give you just a minute to queue those up in the chat. I will say, and one of the things too, Moody, that you and I have talked about repeatedly is the aging workforce and how we have a lot of people who are going to retire in the very near future in construction. So while people are kind of putting in some questions, there's a lot of people aging out. Like the average age of a tower crane operator, I think you and I have talked about this, is like 58 years old. And so where are we getting this next generation? So we do have one question that just popped in that is asked about what are some of the emerging careers that you guys are seeing in commercial construction. Do you want to take that one, Moody? I'll let you give it an answer.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear what y'all are seeing too. The one that I would highlight is if you look at, and this spans commercial and some other construction verticals. And is irrelevant to Houston being an energy capital, but solar PV installers is expected to grow at about 10 times the rate of every other construction trade over the next 10 years. And so I think it's 30%. So not quite 10 times the rate. I think average growth in jobs is in that 5 to 10% range over the next 10 years. But PV installers who are doing solar panel installation, that's a really quickly growing market that also dovetails with the electrical trade. So if you're interested in becoming an electrician, that actually has some overlap with solar work and wind work as well. That's one that I would highlight. But I'm actually curious, Angela, what else are y'all seeing?
So I think some of the other ones that are emerging would be drone photography. So time-lapse photography, as well as inspection via remote inspection. So utilizing web technology, cameras on like GoPro type cameras in order to inspect and commission buildings is very new. I think those are both very emergent pieces. I do think there's a lot of robotics and precast that's happening that didn't necessarily happen before. So a lot of robotics installation and modularization that we're seeing. So for example, it's not uncommon at all for a high-rise to install precast. They'll install precast stairs. Those are built at a factory. They're brought in, they're lifted by crane up onto the platforms. Then either they are held robotically or while they're being welded on and welded into place, or they are positioned and then held by suspension devices. So I think we see some of that. I think another emerging trend right now is around laser technology. So there's a lot of laser technology that's used to make sure that buildings are level and plumb so that they go up straight and so that we're staying within tolerance. And that's not necessarily new, but the level and the caliber of technician that's needed to operate those lasers is definitely increasing as technology goes up. So does that. In the architecture space and in the estimating, project planning, project coordination space, I think we see a lot of three-dimensional rendering that's happening. So you're able to actually step into your design document and move around inside those. So if you've got steel pipe that's running directly into the same place where your ductwork is supposed to be, you can see that before you build the building, and ask the architects to adjust that so that we don't have a metal pipe going right through the middle of our air conditioning, which would not be productive. So that's a good one. We have another question in here that says, what impact do we think artificial intelligence will have on careers in commercial construction?
That is a great question. You mentioned drone controllers recently, and I think that getting into like the weeds on the tech a little bit, seemed from what I've gathered, there's a little bit of a debate within the commercial construction industry about the role of like BIM software, but there is this really interesting concept that's called scan to BIM, which is basically you take a drone or another camera that creates a photogrammetric mesh. So using photogrammetry, which basically take thousands of pictures, mesh them together to create one three-dimensional object, and then actually tying that into a BIM model in order to track progress in an automated fashion. So in theory, you could have a computer vision driven drone, which uses artificial intelligence to run a flight path around a project, then collect all the images which are meshed together using machine learning, and then actually tie that back into the original 3D model, which is also a very like data intensive, potentially AI machine learning driven process. And then actually beyond that, to project what does the project timeline look like, which is a huge question in the industry. Obviously, it's something that project managers spend a lot of time have a lot of concern over, is are we on track or are we not? And so running some kind of simulations of what is this project going to look like based on all the data that we're gathering. Those are all really interesting use cases for artificial intelligence. And so I think especially up at that kind of like general contractor level, on the project level, like in the middle of the project, there are a lot of really interesting use cases for artificial intelligence.
That's a good point, right? So the only way you make money as a general contractor is if you come in on time and on budget. And so looking at using artificial intelligence to look at how your materials flow in and out of the site, using artificial intelligence to predict your labor usages, your labor costs, and what your workforce load is going to be, when to have certain trades show up so that they're not standing there. And that happens also with the specialty contractors. They do a lot of artificial intelligence to tell them, hey, we really can get by with this. But also, every time that you use machine learning, somebody had to teach the machine. And so I think that's also a key place, right? So we have to help the machine learn how to learn us. And so that's an excellent thing. I do want to point out that Moody is 7 years out of high school. And if you listen to him talk about careers, and you listen to him talk specifically about construction, if you stay curious, which he mentioned before, you can learn an amazing amount of things simply by asking good questions. So our last question for you today, Moody, before we jump out, is what is your desired end state for BuildForce? What do you see as your big blue sky or crazy audacious goal for that organization?
Yeah, our goal right now, we really have one mission. We want to do it we're focused on Texas specifically. And we want to make sure that every person who is interested in building a career in construction know that if they're not getting hired through a relationship, that we can help them get into a job as soon as it becomes available, and that they can make a great living doing that. Beyond that, there's a lot of really interesting directions that we can go, and we're thinking a lot about and planning for the future. But that's all still TBD. So ask me in a year, and I'll let you know what the next step is beyond the current mission.
Well, a year ago, you didn't have an app and you didn't have anybody being hired. And so if you just wait a year, I'm sure that Moody's crazy audacious goal will have already been achieved and he'll be moving on to another crazy one. So Moody, thank you so much for joining us. I do want to take just a minute to thank all of our sponsors who made this possible today. NHA Sports Flooring. This is an area that you may be very interested in if you are an athlete. There's a specialized company just for you to install sports flooring in gyms. Baker Concrete, who currently is producing more concrete by the square yard or by the cubic yard in Houston than just about any other concrete company. Griesenbeck Architectural, which does all of the things that we all love. They make sure that there's paper towels in your bathrooms, as well as they install the cool, crazy louvers that go outside of buildings. Another great place for you to work. Rogers O'Brien, who is currently building multiple things inside our city, but currently their largest project that you may be aware of is 3 Riverway. Karsten Interior Services, who offers all of the drywall and paint that you could ever want, and has done some of the coolest jobs I know of around the various different athletic complexes that they've worked with. Big City Access Scaffolding, allowing people to climb to the very top of a building and do it safely. And then our underwriting sponsor, Chamberlain Waterproofing and Roofing, who are absolutely amazing at what they do. They just waterproofed and leak-proofed a school building for HISD that had not been leak-proofed for more than 30 years.